This is Carl Daly. We're visiting with Noam Chomsky, philosopher, author. What else, Mr. Chomsky?
Annoyance.
Annoyance, okay, annoyance. The phone numbers are 222-KKEY and 693-KKEY. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Okay, let's take some phone calls here, Mr. Chomsky. Good afternoon, Dusty. This is Carl Daly, and you're talking to Noam Chomsky.
Oh, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be able to speak to you, Mr. Chomsky.
Oh, thank you.
I'm familiar with your articles in the link, and also your articles have been reprinted in our local newspaper, the Vancouver Columbian.
Oh.
Quite happy about that. I have two questions, and then I'll let someone else get on the phone. Do you foresee a more even-handed approach to the Israeli-Palestinian problem from the Bush administration than was apparent in the Reagan administration? And can you give me the names of a couple of senators that we could write to in support of the Palestinians?
Well, on the second question, I think you should pressure your own, I don't know where you come from, but your own representatives.
You got to be kidding.
Well, I think that's the only way to do it, because they're the only ones who are responsive. They respond to some extent to their own constituencies. But, for example, if I was to write a letter to the senator from Oregon, he'd probably throw it in the wastebasket. I don't vote for him.
That's what would happen if we write.
Well, I'm not so sure of that. I mean, I would say Mark Hatfield, for example, would be responsive. Yeah.
He's not my senator.
Oh, okay.
She's in Washington.
Oh, you're in Washington. I see, yeah.
Slade Gordon.
Okay, yeah, well, that's different. Yeah. So then I'd try the House representatives, who they might be. And I think, don't forget that no matter who the senator is and who the representative is, they care about public pressures, if only because they want their own population to be quiet and apathetic. So one of the ways in which you can affect policy is just by being disruptive and annoying.
Are you aware that you are labeled communist by some of the supporters of the Likud party in Israel?
You wouldn't believe the things I've been labeled. They go across the board, from Nazi to communist to... I've even been accused by the LaRouche organization of running the international terrorist network. I mean, I've been accused of all kinds of things. That sort of comes with the turf. But...
well, that's a compliment coming from LaRouche.
Right, yeah. But, I mean, I feel responsible for what I say, not for, the mud that people throw. But I think your first question is more important. I mean, what are the chances for a change in Bush administration policy?
Right.
Here, I think the crucial question, remember that people in power, this is true in the United States and it's true in any other country, people in power basically understand only one thing: violence and the success of violence. Now, as long as Israel was able to control and repress the population in the occupied territories, the United States was quite happy with it. That's true of Democrats, it's true of Republicans. As long as Israel had things under control and could serve as what's called a strategic asset, they didn't care very much what was going on in the occupied territories.
That's true.
But in the last year, Israel has discovered that it had a lot of trouble controlling the occupied territories. What has happened in the last year is a very impressive thing. I mean, the Intifada, this uprising, from just a human point of view, is very impressive. I mean, it's a real... First of all, it's a popular revolution. It's not... We only talk about throwing stones, but the whole of Arab society on the West Bank and the Gaza Strip has been revitalized and changed. I mean, the traditional authority patterns are breaking down. There are women's groups who are breaking out. There's local communities are taking over their own affairs. It's a real social revolution, and it's a remarkable one. Also, their bravery in standing up against barbaric treatment is extremely impressive. Now, so far, Israel hasn't been able to control it, and it's becoming very costly. And the United States is certainly watching that.
In world opinion, you mean?
Not only in world opinion, but also in other respects. For example, the morale of the Israeli army is beginning to erode.
Noticed that. I told you.
Yeah, that's very significant. Now, remember what happened to the American army in Vietnam. Citizens' armies are not good at attacking civilians. You want to attack civilians, you need professional killers. That's why most imperial powers tend to use mercenaries. Yeah. The United States made a technical mistake in Vietnam. We used the citizens' army to try to fight a colonial war, and that doesn't work because You can't take a kid off the streets and turn him into a professional killer in a year. So the American army began to collapse and erode, and that's happening to its credit, I should say. And that's beginning to happen in Israel, too, and the top command is concerned about it. Also, it's just costly in plain financial terms, I should say. Now, if Israel is incapable of, they're going to try to control the uprising by violence, and Washington will be watching. If they do it, Democrats and Republicans and everyone else will say that's fine. They may not say it, but they'll think it and act that way. If they can't control it by violence, there'll be a shift in U.S. policy. We'll adapt to that and we'll adjust to it. The same thing has happened before. Remember, take the relations between Israel and Egypt. It's kind of suppressed here, but the fact of the matter, which anybody can find out for themselves if they want, the fact of the matter is that Sadat, the president of Egypt, offered a full-scale peace treaty to Israel in 1971. 1971, that's 6 years before he went to Jerusalem. That was rejected by Israel on grounds that they did not want, they recognized it as a full-scale legitimate peace offer, but they thought it would have required that they give up the occupied territories. They wanted to hold on to them. Now, in 1973, they were backed by the United States in that rejection. That's sort of the source of the modern conflict there. In 1973, Egypt attacked Israel. It didn't attack Israel. It attacked the occupied territories. It attacked its own territory occupied by Israel, and it was surprisingly successful. That was a big shock to Israel and to American intelligence. They hadn't expected that, and they adjusted. The adjustment was they recognized that Egypt was a significant force, and therefore you have to deal with it, and they began to move towards what ultimately ended up in Camp David. That is an successful effort to exclude Egypt from the conflict. That eliminates the major Arab deterrent, and that meant that Israel would now be free to move in the occupied territories and against Lebanon. Well, that was an adjustment to the realities of the world, and there's going to be an adjustment to these realities.
Thank you very much for the phone call, Dusty. Good afternoon, Donna. You're speaking to Mr. Noam Chomsky.
Yes, Mr. Chomsky. Several months ago, I heard you and saw you on C-SPAN program with Jeff Cohen. This was in regard to the fact that the press wasn't really a liberal biased press, but on the other hand, possibly was even the other direction, even not necessarily conservative. I don't like to confuse conservatives with people who are right-wingers. And you both made a very wonderful presentation, and I was hoping that you could run a little bit of that by the listeners, because we do have a lot to complain about a liberal biased press. And I was very impressed with the program. And then I would like to ask the question, what can we do to get mainstream press to actually be a little bit more responsible and liberal and unbiased and report everything?
Right. Well, I have there won't be much time to talk about it, but I have a recent book that just came out with a colleague of mine, Edward Herman. It's called Manufacturing Consent, which is, in fact, precisely about this topic. But I got another one on the way. But I personally, I don't like to use the words liberal and conservative. I don't think at least I don't understand what they mean. I think we want the press to tell the truth. Now, I don't care whether it's the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or somebody else. I want them to tell the truth about things that are important, and I think they often don't. I think whatever they're called, liberal or conservative or something else, they reflect certain interests, and it's not very difficult to discover what those interests are. Remember what the major media are. The major media are major corporations. They're owned by and interlinked with even bigger conglomerates. They, like other corporations, they sell a product to a market. The market is advertisers, that is, other businesses, and the product is an audience. So there are, in fact, for the national media, the elite media, it's relatively privileged audiences. That's what they want to sell to advertisers. So what you got is an institution, major corporation, selling privileged audiences to other businesses, and not very surprisingly, that's the point of view of the world that they reflect. They reflect the point of view, the interests of the sellers, the buyers, and the product. And whether they call themselves liberal or conservative or anything else, that's a very biased and narrow view of the world. And I think that one should pressure them to study other things. So, for example, when the United States blocks a peace settlement in the Middle East, both the liberal and the conservative press, whatever that means, ought to tell the truth about it. When the United States moves to try to crush independence and social reform in Central America by violence, everyone ought to tell the truth about it, whether they're called liberal and conservative. And how do you do this? Well, I think the way you do it is like anything else. You bother them. If delegations show up at editorial offices and people are writing letters and you're calling up the editor and so on, you can get a reaction. The press is not responsive to people who never let a pin drop. But any institution, no matter how powerful it is going to be responsive to public disruption. They want a quiet, apathetic public. Anybody with power wants that. And the power that ordinary individuals have, short of gaining the resources to build up your own press, which is something else, but or supporting listener-supported radio or something of that kind. The other option that you have is to just, make costs, be disruptive, bother them, tell them things, approach them. Not, I don't mean throw stones at them. I mean give them information. Say, why aren't you printing this? Here's true facts, important facts. How come you're not printing it? Why are you suppressing that? And so on. They do have professional integrity. I mean, almost, there are some crooks, but by and large, the press, the people in it, have professional integrity, and you can get them to respond to well-presented, accurate truths if you do it insistently enough. But it takes insistence.
Any other questions, Donna?
No, that's about it.
Thank you for the phone call. Good afternoon, Nina. This is Carl Daly. You're talking to Mr. Noam Chomsky.
Yes. Hi, Mr. Chomsky.
Hi.
Yes. I have two questions. When James Baker was at the confirmation hearings, he was asked if we were going to continue to back the persons of our choice, with money and so forth, that ran in the Nicaraguan elections. Mm-hmm. And he said he would look into it. Do you think he will?
Will the United States continue to back the so-called internal opposition?
Yeah.
Of course, because the internal opposition are our agents. I mean, they are, that's the business-based elites. They have virtually no popular support. In fact, one of the things that the press doesn't publish is the polls in Nicaragua, the international polls, which show that all opposition parties together had 9% support over last summer, and they have no interest in democracy or anything like that. They want to get their own wealth and power back. And since their interests happen to coincide with the interests of U.S. elites, U.S. business and investors and so on, the United States will support them. I don't think it should, but it will.
Well, we did that with also Noriega in Panama, didn't we?
Yeah, we supported Noriega as long as he was useful. I mean, it's been known that Noriega was a drug peddler and a crook for, I don't know, at least since the late 70s, if not before.
Possibly before that.
Probably before. I mean, there's some evidence that the Nixon administration knew back in the early 70s, but certainly through this decade we knew. Noriega ran an election in 1984. It was a complete fraud. George Shultz was briefed right before the election by the CIA and the American ambassador, telling him that Noriega had stolen, 50,000 votes or something. But Shultz went down there to legitimize the election and talk about how wonderful it was and dare the Sandinistas to do the same and so on. The reason was Noriega was still doing the job that we asked him to. He became a nuisance later on. He turned out that, aside from being a crook, he also happened to be a nationalist. And when he was no longer willing to play the game the way we wanted it, we tried to overthrow him. In fact, by such ham-handed methods that we succeeded, the Reagan administration succeeded in lining up support for Nicaragua across the hemisphere, although everybody hates his guts. That's a real achievement.
Yeah.
But this had nothing to do with suddenly discovering that Noriega was a gangster and a drug peddler. That was known all along.
What do you think of Lawrence Bryn, the director of Hemispheric Affairs?
Lawrence Burns.
Yeah.
The director of the Council on Hemispheric Affairs.
Yeah.
I think that's a very good organization, and their weekly report on the Americas is one of the best sources of information on Central America.
I'm glad you said that. I thought it was too.
Yeah, it's very valuable.
Yeah, he goes into quite detail.
Yeah. In fact, I was just quoting him without saying it when I was talking about Noriega. It's virtually a quote from the Council on Hemispheric Affairs. Should have given him credit.
Need anything else today?
Well, he was talking this morning about where the Contras are in Honduras, and all the refugees from the hurricane.
Yeah. Well, that's a horrible situation.
How they're calling it the Little Nicaragua, the New Nicaragua, I guess.
Well, you see, it's a very, you know, you really have to be ashamed of this country. But when the hurricane hit Nicaragua, that's just going to have a devastating effect on the country, and we're not giving them a penny of aid. That's real sadism.
Isn't that the first time that a hurricane has ever hit in that area?
Well, there's been nothing. I mean, it's the first time in a century, I think, and it's a worse disaster than the earthquake of 1972. Remember, at that time we gave them a lot of aid, which ended up in the pocket of our buddy Somoza. This time, if we were to give them aid, it would go to the people, which is why we're not giving it. We want Nicaraguans to starve, so that then we can accuse the Sandinistas of economic mismanagement.
You mentioned that the government would like to keep us docile, placid. Is part of this kinder and gentler America, is that a way of doing that?
Yeah, that's part of the public. Remember that any administration has a big public relations component. One of the things they always turn to is the public relations industry, which gives them advice on how to keep the population quiet and apathetic and satisfied and so on. An awful lot of politics is marginalizing the public.
Okay, tonight you're appearing at Lewis and Clark College at the Famblin Sports Center. That talk tonight, that begins at 7:30. That will be about...
It's about U.S. policy in Central America, but a lot of other things will come up.
Okay, and then I will give out Wednesday and Thursday. There's other things going on in town, and I'll be letting the people know about this in the next hour. Mr. Chomsky, I want to thank you very much for this hurried appearance here this afternoon. Much appreciated. And anytime you're back in Portland, you're welcome at Key Radio.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.